A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman and was 31 at the time. I know, to some it seems unsafe for a woman to work a graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet across from it. I really didn't think I would have that many problems. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busier night. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot and last minute check the trash. It was time for a cigarette, and I had one headphone and kinda jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, it looked like he was enjoying a much needed piss. Against the sheriff's office though? Yeah, the building closed at 4 p.m. and didn't open again until 6 the next morning, but why? By the lack of his ripped white t-shirt, I remembered that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep and I could already tell he had a good buzz going. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off of him and tried not to draw attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled in. I was still outside as they pulled up. I saw him look at the car and then at me and back and forth again and again. As the customer was leaving, I walked her outside. I still had half a smoke burning and left my dustpan outside with the squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily and seemingly engage in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. I made an awkward joke about him being the one who should be more afraid of me or something like that. Yet the man was still there, but closer to the road, now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he was yelling, it was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and can barely stand straight. Still swaying away, I didn't engage him, but I didn't take my eyes off him this time. I just slowly walked back into the store. Something about his face really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, but his eyes looked wild. My experience during graveyard jobs has been that the crazy-eyed ones are the worst ones. I didn't like it at all and wanted no part of it. I still had almost 3 hours to go and 2 before any other employees got there. Instantly, I went to the computer and typed up a temporary close sign, just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming around the counter on my way to the doors when I saw that he'd walked across the road to my side now. I literally just barely got the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. My hand mimed the hand signal for cut across my neck, basically saying, "Nope, sorry, you can't come in here, we're closed." I shook my head back and forth too, hoping to further discourage him. He started walking away but screamed something at me while he was walking, angrily. I didn't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled that I was an a-hole or anything. I mean like he was at an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands everywhere. Definitely knowing I'm in the wrong shift of the wrong job, I got really skeeved out. I decided to call the cops, and it's a good thing too because the minute I hung up with them, there he comes again, up to the door, and he starts pulling and banging on it. He backs up and runs into it trying to ram it. Not that it would have done any good. I made the mistake of telling him that I called the cops and his ass was about to be grass. I say I made the mistake of telling him because once I said that, he took off and the police never found him. They drove around the road and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't know where he could have gone to. He didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I didn't fill out a police report or anything. I was safe behind thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift, and it just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I would have had to spend the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I could have avoided that, and I'll never know what the right choice was. I'm just so glad I don't work there anymore. Okay, so a little backstory before I tell you one of the crazy experiences of mine that happened during my 2-year security career from 2013 to 2015. I am a 6'7" male in Australia. I'd like to think I'm a fairly tough and intimidating guy, but some of that used to go on at the mall. I used to work the night shift for, still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall I worked at was very, very large, probably the largest in my state I'd say. And all the way up to about 8:30 p.m. it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 would we manage to usher all of the stragglers out and only at about 11 p.m. would all the business owners have left. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure there was no one sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. We didn't have guns or batons, only a can of mace that was rarely ever used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by the 4 to 5 of us on a shift at a time, and they usually would be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of security. This one night though, shit started getting really weird for me on the night shift. So I'd say it was about 2 o'clock and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the mall that had any light at nighttime due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off from the food courts into some toilets. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I immediately put on edge and I flicked on my torch, my flashlight, without a moment of hesitation. I can remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 or 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the hall, the noise became louder and louder until I was at the end of the hallway and there was the toilet doors to the left and right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female toilets though, and I gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny little crack. The noise was now very clear and had me not scared but confused. I yelled, "Oi, who's in there?" The noise quickly stopped, and I paused for a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear I could hear breathing now, low male breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio. "This is 1-3. I need help in food court bathrooms. I think someone's here." No response. This was really strange, and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and I mean always, and now I was becoming truly quite alarmed. "This is 1-3. Does anyone copy?" Still no response, and I can remember whispering to myself, "What the actual?" I again opened the door a tiny crack. "Listen, mate," I said, sounding as intimidating as possible. "If you don't come out with your hands up, you're going to end up eating your teeth tonight. Do you want that?" I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, there was no noise at all now. I yelled into the bathroom, "Okay, mate, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault. You'll never walk again." I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would somebody be in the female bathrooms? And what was the metal noise? What was even happening? I very slowly opened the door and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the cubicles were open. Weird. But other than that, the room was totally empty. I was totally shitting myself about now. I was definitely losing it. I walked into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. Scared to the core, I let out a faint, "This is some horror movie shit, eh? Come out," when I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me. I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my torch on a massive man, at least a head taller than me, or so it seemed in my state at the time. He was Caucasian and at least in his 40s, with matted gray hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door, but he stopped dead still in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty smile like a kid would make when he gets caught stealing biscuits or something like that. And I'm not going to lie, I was so scared I froze. He lifted his finger up to his mouth. "Shh," before swinging the door open all the way and sprinting out with what looked like some type of small metal box in his hands. Turns out, he was just behind the toilet door when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so close to him and I didn't even notice him. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and I got right on to telling my coworkers about my story, and they collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none of them were as close of a shave as mine, and I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around in a job like that. I needed help, and for some reason my radio just destroyed itself. Why? It was winter 2012, and I was 18 or 19 at the time. I was working in a patrol station in an average-sized town in England. It was a okay job, good money for somebody who was at college at the time. It was just a shame it was a weekend job, so while my friends were getting drunk and having fun, I was in a petrol station serving taxi drivers and the occasional drunk. Anyway, back to the story. It started off like any other night. Serve people, clean up, do stock the average night shift work. Since it was winter, the night was really dark. You could only see faint outlines of people walking back and forth, even with streetlights. The place where I worked was situated across the road from a pub, and had an alley running beside it, the lead to a housing estate. Around 3 to 4 a.m., as I finished cleaning a set of shelves, I noticed a figure standing in the alley, just out of the light, but just enough to hide his face. But you can make out his clothing, and I initially brushed it off as somebody waiting for a taxi, as it seemed harmless enough. I sat down in my chair behind the counter and looked at my phone, and we played games for a bit. When I looked up, it was 5 a.m., and he was still there, waiting, watching me. To make my situation worse, after 5, there's hardly any traffic or passerby. I had that guttural feeling that he had some harmful intent. I was safe, however, as I was locked in till morning. I started back in a trance, trying to keep an eye on whatever he would do next. After a while, though, I needed to use the toilet, so I went and came back thinking that he might have walked off, but he didn't. He was still there. I then decided not to do my last job until my coworker came in to start their shift, as my last job was to take out the fire extinguishers and sand buckets. It got to about 6 a.m. The figure faded back into the alley, and I didn't see him for the rest of my shift. When my worker arrived, it was still dark, and I usually walked the 10 minutes back home, but I got a taxi home after that shift. I felt that guy could be anywhere still watching me. I told my coworkers and family members about my experience, and they said personally they haven't experienced anything like it, and wouldn't like to either. I was very nervous when doing my shifts from then on, feeling like as soon as I let my guard down, he would strike, but thankfully nothing else ever happened again after that, and I quit the following summer to go to university. I think it's safe to say I wouldn't want to meet this person. For some understanding, this happened in the United States, and it was the summer of 2012, and my longtime boyfriend and I had recently gotten married. Even though we were dirt poor college students and lived in a dinky apartment, we were having a blast. This particular summer, we gathered with our friends at a local movie theater almost every weekend. There was one just down the street from our apartment that had really cheap movie tickets. A night out that was under $10 was certainly within our budget. Anyway, one Thursday night, I received a call from this group of friends inviting us to watch the midnight premiere of the newest Batman movie, and I had just finished working a 12-hour night shift and was pretty tired. I almost refused the invitation and thought of crashing in my apartment instead. However, I didn't want to miss out on the fun, and it was a movie I'd wanted to see for a while anyway. Certainly it wouldn't do any harm to stay up later than usual and miss a few hours of sleep, right? At 10:30 p.m., we met at the theater. We passed large cardboard cutouts of Catwoman and Batman as we walked inside, greeted by the smell of buttery popcorn and the fresh chatter of excited moviegoers. The ticket booth was to the right of the entrance, and just above that was an electronic list of movies being played. The 12 a.m. showing of The Dark Knight Rises was displayed up there in bright red letters. Being paranoid that the tickets would sell out quickly, one of my friends swung by earlier that day and purchased tickets for all of us, and we bypassed the ticket line and went straight to the ticket taker. She smiled at us kindly and directed us to Theater 9, which was on the right side of the lobby. If only I had known what I do now, that among the crowds a killer was lurking. That as I walked across the tacky red and purple carpet towards Theater 9, I could have been walking to my death. I think about it often now. What would I have done if I had known? Pulled the fire alarm, called the police, screamed for people to run away? But of course, I had no way of knowing what was about to happen. Oblivious to the peril I was putting myself in, I pushed open the doors for Theater 9 without giving it a second thought. The hallway in this theater was shaped like a U, and you could go either right or left. Theater 9 was the largest screening room in the building, perfect for accommodating the crowds that midnight premieres brought in. The screen was motionless and gray. Not even the previews had started yet, because There was still a good hour and a half left until the movie actually started. We entered on the right side, so all of the seats were to our left. I remember being surprised at just how packed the theater already was. Just about every seat was filled. Much to our dismay, at first, it seemed like we wouldn't find a spot to sit together. Now, the way this theater was set up, there was a section of seats right in the front of the screen. This area was flat, and were about 5 rows of seating in this section. A lot of seats in that section were empty. But sitting right in front of the movie screen sucks, and none of us wanted to sit there. One of my friends then spotted a row with 5 empty seats all next to each other, perfect for the amount of people we had. These seats were about 3 to 4 rows up from the seating rows start to elevate. We ran up the stairs before someone could take the seats and filed in. My husband, Brock, sat in the 5th seat, and I sat next to him. And my friend Samantha sat next to me. On my right side, her boyfriend, Tommy, sat next to her, and another friend named Leo sat in the aisle seat. We spent the next several minutes casually chatting, joking around and laughing, and after a while, my 3 friends went to the lobby to buy drinks and that addicting movie theater popcorn. While they were gone, Brock and I passed out time by people watching. The theater was bright since the lights weren't dimmed yet, and I could see everyone clearly. There were a lot of people dressed in Batman t-shirts and hoodies. One person even had a mask and one of those shirts with an attached cape. There were a lot of kids in attendance as well, which wasn't surprising, because even though it was a Thursday night, it was summer vacation, so that meant no school the next day. Of all the people I saw, the person I will never forget was the little girl sitting in our same row, a few chairs away. She was really cute, blonde with blue eyes, and passed us several times on her way to the lobby, each time coming back with various snacks and popcorn. Overall, people seemed very excited to see the movie, and the room was filled with energy and laughter. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the lights started to dim, and the previews began. Just like every movie I've seen before, a quick animation flashed across the screen, reminding us to get refreshments from the lobby. We were already devouring popcorn like ravenous animals. To silence our cell phones and to make sure we know where the emergency exits were. The animation had this ugly CGI cat in a tuxedo that was sitting in a movie theater. I casually glanced at the bright screen emergency exit signs that were on the left and right sides of the movie screen. I didn't think much of that reminder like usual, and after that, I only remember one preview for The Man of Steel. The others, I'm not sure what they were about. When the movie started, the theater erupted into cheering and clapping. The title of the movie, The Dark Knight Rises, exploded onto the screen. This was followed by the scene where Bane is hijacking a plane. I thought this scene was pretty cool, and it caught my interest right away. Only when the movie started to get a little less interesting did I remember just how tired I was. I decided I would close my eyes at the most boring parts to get a little bit of rest. I'd been awake for 20 hours at that point, so I was rightfully sleepy, and my eyes were closed for the most part of the duration of Batman and Catwoman's encounter, and I don't really remember what was going on in that part of the movie. Perhaps some of you have seen it and know what I'm talking about. Anyway, when I opened my eyes again, Bruce Wayne was on his computer digging up information on Catwoman. This is the last scene I saw. I never got to watch the rest of the movie. All of a sudden, a loud bang erupted from the left side of the theater. I sort of screamed a little because it startled me, and a strange smell started to fill the auditorium. It was the smell of like a firework, so I thought it was a cherry bomb or something similar. Had someone thrown fireworks into the crowd as a prank? Then, down near the right side of the movie screen, the dark silhouette of a person caught my attention. They were just a black frame against the bright movie screen. A series of flashing lights was coming from this person. It was a weird moment where time literally slowed down and everything went strangely quiet. I was completely frozen, unable to move, and really unable to think at all. It was like my brain had stopped working entirely. Brock caught on immediately to what was happening, and he grabbed me. He pulled me to the ground and lay on top of me, shielding me with his own body. At this point, and sound returned to me, I could hear the gunshots ringing across the theater, and people were screaming. The movie was still playing on top of it all, creating a chaotic explosion of sound. I realized the flashing lights I had seen were bullets flying out of a gun barrel. An instant sensation of adrenaline flooded my body. There was nothing, absolutely nothing I could do except lay there and hope to God that the bullets I heard ripping through the seats and walls wouldn't go through me. And at one point, shrapnel hit my head, cutting off a good chunk of my hair. And as I reached for the spot to make sure it wasn't bleeding, hot pieces of metal fell into my hand. I was lying face up, so I could see everything that was happening. The lights from a still-playing movie danced across the ceiling and walls, and my friends were on the floor with me. Our unfinished bucket of popcorn was spilled all the way across the floor, and Leo had his legs sticking out into the aisle because there wasn't enough room for him to hide completely behind the seats. At some point, Samantha's water bottle, which had been in a cup holder of our seats, exploded. Water splashed all over my face, and the smell of gun smoke was overwhelming. Riot gray tear gas made me cry and caused me to cough uncontrollably, and there was another smell too. The horrible metallic smell of blood that I'll never forget. I remember my lower body feeling wet all of a sudden. For some reason, I thought this came from the leaking water bottle too, but I soon realized that this wasn't the case. All of a sudden, things went strangely quiet. The bullets had stopped for some reason, and Tommy shouted, "Let's get out of here," and we took advantage of the opportunity and made a run for it. We ran down the stairs across the front of the screen towards a bright green exit sign. We crammed into a small closet-like space where the door was. It was so dark, we had a hard time finding it. We were screaming and slamming on the walls to find the door, blinded by the tear gas and dumbfounded by shock. Then finally, my hands felt the metal door handle, and I pushed against it with all my strength, and the door flew open, and the light of a nearby streetlight flooded our eyes. We pushed against the door so hard that we all fell over onto the concrete, and Samantha lost her pink flip-flops just outside this doorway. As I scrambled to my feet and literally ran for my life, I realized my legs were red, absolutely soaked with blood. It was like I dipped my legs into a bathtub full of it. I checked my body all over and realized I wasn't injured at all. Where'd this blood come from? I looked behind me and realized the blood was my husband's. He had been shot in the leg. A massive gaping hole had ripped through the lower half of Brock's right leg. His foot was barely hanging on and dangled lifelessly. Leo and a young man I didn't recognize were carrying Brock because after falling outside the door, he lost all his strength and couldn't walk. I was completely shocked. I had no idea he had been injured, especially since he was right behind me the whole time and managed to escape the theater all by himself. He did it on one foot. I'll never know how he did it. At this point, I screamed, and my scream was so loud that it alerted nearby construction workers at the back of the theater, and there was a narrow parking lot, followed by a grassy lawn and then the street beyond that. The construction workers were doing road repairs on the street, but as soon as they heard my scream and saw us running, they stopped working and watched what was going on. I'm not sure why this is such a vivid part of my memory anyway. They carried Brock along the back sidewalk all the way to the end, where the corner of the building is. This was quite a distance, several dozen feet. My husband then collapsed from exhaustion and pain, saying he couldn't move anymore. He lay down and a puddle of blood started to form beneath him. I looked back and realized we had left a trail of blood leading from the door all the way to our current position, and I was trembling. I knelt beside Brock and glanced around to see who had been injured. Tommy had been shot in the knee. And the hip, and was further in the parking lot away. The teenager who helped my husband was also injured, and his dad and mom were with him. His mom was sitting against the wall and looked like she was going to pass out. She was bleeding from several places. That family escaped at the same time we did. I guess they heard bullets stop and decided to make a run for it, too. We were all lucky because the shooting was still going on inside. I had to take off my shirt and use it to stop the bleeding, and I'll never forget how lifeless and limp his leg felt. And I imagine that's what a dead body must feel like. I got blood all over my hands and arms. The police showed up really fast. I'd say we were the only ones outside for a minute or two before the red and blue sirens filled the night and rushed to our location. We were literally a block away from the police station. A female officer stood by us the whole time until paramedics arrived, which took a very long time. Brock was one of the last to be taken to a hospital, and he was bleeding out for almost 20 minutes before an ambulance pulled up onto the same street with the road work. At this point, he had become almost unresponsive and was on the verge of consciousness. Several massive guys rushed across the grass with a stretcher, loaded him onto it, and then ran with him back to the waiting ambulance. I wasn't able to go with him because there was another injured person in the ambulance and it was too crowded. I wandered around to the front of the theater alone, unsure of where my friends had went. My blood-stained shirt and a pool of blood were left behind on the corner of that sidewalk. Walking through the crowds felt like a dream. I couldn't believe what just happened. People were in hysterics and crying. A lot of people, such as me, covered in blood. And like me, I'm pretty sure the blood staining their skin and clothes wasn't their own. A lot of people seemed to notice how lonely and dazed I looked, so they kept me company and even offered me a ride to different hospitals to find Brock, because I hadn't been told what the hospital he was taken to. I hung around these people for a while as police swarmed the area and asked us what we saw inside the theater. The whole parking lot was on lockdown and we weren't going to be allowed to leave anytime soon. It was around 2 a.m., so it was very dark outside still, and I was pretty cold, wearing only an undershirt and shorts. The flashing red and blue lights of what seemed like 100 police cars were blinding. I remember seeing a big police vehicle pull up that said something like Crime Scene Investigation Unit on it. I think that's when it really sank in and hit me. I started to get sick to my stomach and wanted to vomit, but somehow I was able to hold it back. Eventually, police started letting people leave. I jumped into my truck and booked it out of there. I was in such a panic that I didn't even think to go back to my apartment and grab my cell phone, which I had forgotten, and call my parents or someone else to help me. I was angry, upset, scared, and most of all, still in a state of shock. Was I really going to lose Brock only a month shy of our first wedding anniversary because of some psychopath with a gun? Thankfully, by the time dawn rolled around, I found the hospital he was treated in. This was in the next city over, maybe 45 minutes from the theater if you're going the speed limit. I was so happy to be there, and the hospital staff were all so welcoming and understanding. After making sure I wasn't injured as well, they let me wait in the ICU room that Brock would be placed in when he was done recovering from surgery. I was so glad he was alive. Brock and Tommy both had survived, though many others weren't so lucky. I found out the following day, after some much needed sleep on a hospital couch, that 12 people were killed in the shooting and over 70 injured. I remembered they first thought 15 were killed, but the real number was 12. The little blonde girl sitting in my row did not survive. She died in the theater no more than a few feet from us. She had been shot multiple times. A heartbroken police officer who cried during his court testimony tried unsuccessfully to save her by carrying her out of the theater and having her sent to a hospital. Tommy was rushed to a different hospital in the back of a police car. He underwent surgery and made a full recovery. The bullet missed his hip bone and narrowly missed his urinary tract and bladder. According to the surgeons, my husband has lost almost half his blood. Brock made it to the hospital just in time. Any later and he would have died. He underwent several blood transfusions and was in the hospital for 21 days. The wound to his leg was severe enough that they had to amputate it after trying unsuccessfully to save it. It's been so long since the shooting happened that my husband and friends and I have been able to recover from it somewhat. The event was pretty horrifying and has left us scarred for sure. I wouldn't consider that part of the story to be creepy though. No, the creepy part is the shooter himself. I later learned much more about him from the murder trial that would follow in the coming years. Though my encounter with this man was very brief, he has affected my life greatly. Just to know that people like this exist is disturbing, to say the least. He is certainly one twisted individual that I never want to see again. I learned everything from watching the televised trial that took place in early 2015. This guy was going to school for neuroscience or something in California, and I guess he was a pretty smart guy. However, for some reason he had an obsession with killing people and had a stalker mentality. And after dropping out of UC University, he moved to my state and chose my local theater to commit a mass shooting. Before that, he was planning on hiding along remote hiking trails up in the mountains, jumping people, pulling them into the woods and killing them there. Though he never went through with that idea, he stalked my theater for months and had his shooting all planned out for the night of July 20th. Though I never saw him before this, it's unnerving to think this guy could have been watching us every time we went to the theater, and we would have never known it. We were completely unaware of what he had planned against us. This completely ruined my sense of security, because who knows what the next stranger to you is planning on doing to you. I came very close to the shooter, but I never actually saw his face in person until I was forced to testify in court. Of course, I saw his mugshots on television, but while in the theater, I only saw him as a dark silhouette in the shadows, like a demonic figure rendered from the darkest and most sinister nightmare. He was even in the hallway that we passed upon running for the exit emergency. The only thing stopping him from killing us there and then was his jammed assault rifle to commit this crime. He ordered a few thousand rounds of ammunition, riot gear and armor, tear gas, an assault rifle, and a shotgun. He took pictures of himself which were shown in court, wearing all of his gear like some sick trophy and holding up these weapons with a menacing smile. He dyed his hair orange and put in this sick, creepy black contacts while making devilish faces into his camera. Something that made me sick just looking at. Before driving to the theater with all of his gear in his car, he booby-trapped his entire apartment and set it to explode if anyone opened the door. Then, once at the theater, he posed as a moviegoer and even bought a ticket for the movie. I think his ticket had Theater 8 on it, which was next door, but Theater 9 had more people in it, so he went into number 9 instead. He was in the few front rows. I must have passed him several times in the lobby while he was there. Maybe he had seen me too at some point during the movie, and he got up and went through the side exit, which didn't have an alarm for some reason. Kept it propped open with something, then went to his car, put on all his armor and grabbed his weapons. Then he came back inside and started shooting. When we escaped the theater, we ran past his white car, which was parked right at the exit. We didn't even notice it. At some point he came outside, and he would have seen us on the concrete. I don't know what stopped him from shooting people that were outside too, but he could have easily ended us there and then if he wanted to. And I think the hardest part was facing, for me, this twisted individual in court. I'll never forget Rising, as they called my name, walking down the center row past my family, other survivors, and crowds of news-hungry media personnel. I sat right across from him, maybe only 10 feet away, while his orange hair was gone, and he wasn't wearing black contacts. Being so close to him was a creepy and uncomfortable experience. My encounters with this man are certainly ones I will never forget. I can now say that I've come face to face with a true deranged psychopath. He just had this blank stare in his eyes the whole time. If eyes truly are the windows to the soul, then his soul is filled with nothing but a cold indifference for those he had murdered and harmed. He wouldn't even look at me. Sitting across from him in court was the second time I had knowingly been in the room. The same room, at that, with this man. A man who had tried to take my life, but thankfully failed, and a man who would end up spending forever behind bars. When, at the end of it all, he was sentenced to 3,318 years in prison for his crimes. This is to the man who tried to kill me, the man who has caused countless nightmares and fueled the fires of my paranoia, the man who hurt my friends and family, causing years of untold grief for my husband because he'll never walk the same again, the man who stole the innocence and joy from a 6-year-old child who went into that theater alive and came out dead, to the man who carried the worst mass shooting in Colorado history. I hope you rot in prison.